Hello, it's Rich from Medieval History Buff. Thank you for watching my video, and please consider liking, subscribing and sharing. Of all Edward III's children, the Black Prince is unquestionably the most famous. But this is not to say his other children did not leave their own impact, whether large or small, on history. John of Gaunt, for instance, also made a significant imprint. His reputation hit a dramatic low during the time of the Peasants' Revolt, but over time he would redeem himself. Here I'll be having a quick look at all of Edward III's children, not just the famous ones. Life was hard in the 14th century, and there was no guarantee a child would even make it out of infancy. And this was true even for royalty. 4 of Edward's children, with his queen, Philippa, died either shortly after birth or before they were even born. The poor babies were 3 boys, 2 Williams, a Thomas, and a girl called Blanche. Blanche and William, both born at Windsor, are buried at Westminster Abbey. The other William is buried near his birthplace in York. Thomas is buried in Hertfordshire. The fate of these tragic infants is unfortunately a sad reality of childbirth and life in the 14th century. The eldest of Edward III's children was Edward the Black Prince, born in 1330. His brilliant performance at Crecy, aged just 16 in 1346, showed he was going to become one of the mightiest warriors of his age or any age. A decade after Crecy, at Poitiers, the Black Prince once again demonstrated his brilliance and captured the King of France, John II. Such was the Black Prince's treatment of John II that he earned huge praise from the French king. The prince also went on to campaign in Castile and Aquitaine. In 1370, Edward sacked Limoges in devastating fashion after it had surrendered to the French. This was the ugly side of the Black Prince's personality. But by this point, he was not in good health, and this had been exacerbated by his exertions across Europe, and he would die a year before his father, and so missed the opportunity to become king. That honour would instead go to the Black Prince's son, Richard II. The eldest daughter of Edward III was a girl named Isabella, who married the Earl of Bedford, with whom she produced 2 children. And the next born to the king was a girl also called Joan. She was born at the Tower of London in 1333. She was betrothed to Peter or Pedro of Castile, but she died on her journey to marry him. Joan was a victim of the plague that was now gripping Europe. She was just 14. The second son to be born that survived infancy was Lionel of Antwerp. Lionel, as his name indicates, was born in modern-day Belgium, and his main duties were to oversee matters in Ireland. In Lionel's household was a man by the name of Geoffrey Chaucer. The second most famous of Edward III's children was undoubtedly John of Gaunt, born in 1340. Like Lionel had been, John was also born in modern-day Belgium. Like the Black Prince, John also would be the father of a king. The future Henry IV was born to John and his first wife, Blanche of Lancaster. John became an extraordinarily rich man, which put him at the centre of the ire of the peasants' revolt in 1381. His palace was destroyed, but both he and his heir, Henry, escaped with their lives, Henry having a closer escape than John did. John also had a tetchy relationship with his nephew, Richard II. After John's return from Castile, where he had tried to win the crown through right of his second marriage to Constance of Castile, he restored calm in England as Richard II's reign began to decline. This gave a much-needed boost to John's reputation. He died in 1399 and was buried at St. Paul's Cathedral, but his tomb was destroyed by the Great Fire of London. The next child to be born to the royal couple was Edmund of Langley in 1341. Edmund joined in campaigns in France in the 1370s in what proved to be a less successful period for England in the 100 Years' War, and he also assisted in his brother John's attempts to become King of Castile. In 1399, Edmund was one of the men who was won over by Henry Bolingbroke as he attempted to usurp the throne from Richard II. Edmund died not long after, and he is buried at King's Langley in Hertfordshire, where he was also born. In 1342, Edward III and Philippa lost their baby, Blanche, before a couple of years later another girl was born to them. This was Mary of Waltham. Sadly, Mary's life was another short one. She was just 16 when she died, but before she died, she married John IV, Duke of Brittany, who she seems to have made an impression on as he mourned her passing. The final daughter born to Edward and Philippa was a girl called Margaret, and hers was another tragically short life. Margaret was even younger than Mary when she died, only 15. Then around the time of the plague, two infant sons died, Thomas and William of Windsor. Going through the children of Edward III is a stark reminder of the fragility of life in 14th century England. The final son and child to be born was Thomas of Woodstock, born in 1355. Thomas would be present alongside his father at the death of his beloved mother, Philippa. Thomas was at the forefront of the discontent at the reign of his nephew, Richard II, and he was a leader of the Lords Appellant, who sought to remove corrupt members of Richard's government. However, Richard got his revenge nearly a decade later and had his own uncle murdered. It would have been quite easy for me to have overlooked the infant children as inconsequential and just concentrated instead on the older of Edward III's children, but it must be remembered that these were real people, and babies not having a chance at life in the 14th century is as tragic as it would be now. It's a reminder to us all to remember how fortunate we are in the 21st century. And for me, it's also worth a moment to remember not just the infants, but also Joan, Margaret, and Mary, who also died well before their time. And even the eldest of Edward III's children died at an age that we would consider fairly young now. And this is my main interest in history. It's about the human element and not just treating these people as some sort of inconsequential statistic. It's about treating them as individuals and remembering that they too had real emotions and feelings. Yes, you have to remember the stark realities of life then, but it must be done so respectfully, and it's worth learning about those whose existence has almost become like it never happened. After all, this will happen to us all one day, as dark and gloomy as that may sound.